Good evening, everyone. It is May 8th, 2024, and we are going to hopefully finish out the video. I don't know, we might not get through the whole thing. Or we might, I don't know. But here is where we left off with regards to the document. Share. All right, so this is on, well, at least on my thing, it's on page 11. So, let's see. Yeah, it's on page 11. See at the bottom, 1121. And it is a few paragraphs down. So that's what you'll need to refer to as we're doing the video. All right. And if you want to, we've already done the first 45 minutes, 46 minutes of this, which is recorded already. So if you want to go back and review that, if you haven't already, you may do so after. But we will continue on with the video.
Controller of the currency is authorized to issue circulating notes in blank, duly registered and countersigned, the emergency currency. Let's go to the congressional record of March 9th, and let's see what our congressmen were saying about this. It's Exhibit 38. Mr. McFadden is speaking. He says, I regret that the membership of the House has had no opportunity to consider or even read this bill. They didn't have a copy of it. It was an emergency bill. The first opportunity I had to know what this legislation is was when it was read from the clerk's desk. It is an important banking bill. It is a dictatorship over finance in the United States. It is complete control over the banking system in the United States. He goes on and says, it is difficult under the circumstances to discuss this bill. The first section of the bill, as I grasp it, is practically the war powers that were given back in 1917. And he goes on talking. And he says, I would like to ask the chairman of the committee if this is a plan to change the holding of the security back of the Federal Reserve note to the Treasury of the United States rather than the Federal Reserve agent. So you see what he's asking. Prior to 1933, the American people placed their gold on deposit with the Federal Reserve banks. The Federal Reserve banks held that gold as security. And when the American people wanted their money, they took their notes to the bank and got the gold, didn't they? But now we see McFadden asking the question, is this a plan to change the holding of the security from the Federal Reserve banks to the Treasury? Mr. Stigall answers. He says this provision is for the issuance of Federal Reserve bank notes and not for Federal Reserve notes. And the security back of it is the obligations, notes, drafts, bills of exchange outlined in the section to which the gentleman has referred. So the new currency is not secured by the gold. The gold was seized by the government. The new currency is going to be reserve banknotes. They're going to be secured by the obligations of the people held by the Treasury. So McFadden says then the new circulation is to be Federal Reserve banknotes and not Federal Reserve notes. Is that true? Mr. Stigall says, insofar as the provisions of this section are concerned, yes. We now have the emergency currency. Mr. Britton says, in Exhibit 39, my observation of the bill as it was read to the House, it would appear that the amount of banknotes that might be issued by the Federal Reserve System is not limited. That will depend entirely upon the amount of collateral that is presented from time to time for exchange for the banknotes. Is that not correct? Mr. McFadden says, yes, I think that's correct. Who is the collateral? The A's and the B's are all obligations upon the people of the United States. We became the collateral in this country. We became the chattel property. We look at Exhibit 40, Mr. Patman speaking. He says the money will be worth 100 cents on the dollar because it is backed by the credit of the nation. It will represent a mortgage on all the homes and other property of all the people in the nation. Who has the authority to mortgage property? Only the owner. Who is it that is now mortgaged the property? We are not owners, we are only users. The titles were seized on March the 9th of 1933 under those war powers. We also find in...
Hang on just for a sec. So the document says, Abby, stop. It now is no wonder that credit became so available after the Depression. It was needed to back our monetary system, our debts, our obligations, our homes, our jobs. We were now slaves for the system. And above it just says, who is the collateral? We are chattel, aren't we? We have no rights. Our rights were suspended along with the Constitution. We became chattel property to the corporate government. Our transactions and obligations, the collateral for the issuance of the Federal Reserve banknotes.
'48 Statute 1, that when required to do so by the Secretary of the Treasury, each Federal Reserve agent shall act as agent of the Treasurer of the United States or the controller of the currency or both for the performances of any function which the Treasurer or the controller may be called upon to perform in carrying out the provisions of this paragraph. We see the Federal Reserve at that time was also taken over by the Treasury. We also remember that once the people...
Okay, and this says the Federal Reserve was taken over by the Treasury. The Treasury holds the assets. We are the collateral, ourselves and our property. To summarize briefly, on March 9th, 1933, the American people in all their domestic, daily, and commercial transactions became the same as the enemy. The President of the United States, through licenses or any other form, was given the power to regulate and control the actions of enemies. He made we the people chattel property. He seized our gold, our property, and our rights, and he suspended the Constitution. And we know that current law to this day says that all proclamations issued heretofore or hereafter by the President or the Secretary of the Treasury are approved and confirmed by Congress. Pretty broad, sweeping approval to be automatic. Wouldn't you agree?
A question.
Yep.
That statement, the Federal Reserve was taken over by the Treasury. I thought it was the other way around.
Yeah, so did I. I'm not, maybe that's like a typo, because I think he said that too. Said the Federal Reserve was taken over by the Treasury.
Well, I know they had, there were sub-treasuries all around the country. So they were holding, the money around the country, and those were either converted or closed down. They were converted into Federal Reserve banks or closed down. I have that list of where they were all. They were called sub-treasuries. So my understanding is they were all closed, and the Federal Reserve took everything. And what's his name? The guy who's on the post office here warned the Congress that once everything's turned over to the Federal Reserve, we will not be able to have any control over how they handle it if they handle it poorly or, protect it or whatever, because it'll become their property. So I I don't know, that sentence doesn't sound right.
Yeah, didn't he say the same thing too? Hold on for a second. Let me go back just a little bit.
We see the Federal Reserve at that time was also taken over by the Treasury.
I did say it. So wait a second. Why? Say, let's go back to the statutes at large. When required to do so by the Secretary of the Treasury, each Federal Reserve agent shall act as agent of the Treasurer of the United States or of the Comptroller of the currency or both for the performance of any functions which the Treasurer or the Comptroller may be called upon to perform in carrying out the provisions of this paragraph. I would say that maybe what they mean is the Treasury engulfed, like ate up the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve agents then became Treasury agents, and they were kind of melded together. So, but it's really the Federal Reserve took over the Treasury because they embedded themselves into the Treasury and then took control over it once they got their agents in there. But maybe he's saying that the Treasury took control over the Federal Reserve by bringing their agents into a official government title. But then it turned around where once the Federal Reserve agents were in, that gave them credence, that gave them, what's the word I'm looking for? That gave them standing to say that the Treasury was the Federal Reserve and vice versa.
From this document, I have the sub-treasuries and stuff like that, because it was like, this guy was warning them. He was the first Federal Reserve chair, and he was warning the Congress that, hey, you realize that you're going to lose control over everything when you turn this all over to them. So I'll find it.
Okay.
We also remember that once the people and the institutions were declared to be enemy institutions, then the only way they could operate is under the form of license. If we go to Exhibit 4 or Exhibit 42, President Roosevelt's papers, we find that the Secretary of the Treasury will issue a license to banks which are members of the Federal Reserve System, whether national or state, located in each of the 12 Federal Reserve Bank cities, to open Monday morning. So for any bank to reopen on Monday morning, they were now required to receive the license. If we go to fifth edition.
Another question. When he's talking about licensing, would that be equated to register? Like we're told we haven't registered the business name. Yep. Would that be equivalent?
It sounds like it.
Yeah, it sounds like everybody has to have a license to do business. So
yep.
I don't know if those terms are interchangeable, but it almost sounds like we are at fault by not registering our business name, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, just it all is pretty dark.
Yep, good point. I mean, it's dark, but at least if we figure out how, the rules of the game, then we can play or manipulate those rules to our advantage.
Yeah, and I'm in the process of doing that right now. I'll tell you about it later.
Okay.
And that exists today. We can read the bank holiday of 1933. It sums it all up very well. It says Presidential Proclamations number 2039.
Dang it. Ah! Stupid. Sorry, guys. So annoying because I've got like 3 windows open here and on a very tiny screen. So I just wanted to make sure that we got this. So by having the banks license their establishment through the Secretary of Treasury, the Treasury then therefore took over the banking system. And I guess that goes in line with the Federal Reserve was taken over by the Treasury. It's brought it into its fold by doing all of this and making the banks licensed through the federal government to operate.
The thing is, licensing is about anyone who's enemy.
Because the banks are enemies. Banks were known as enemies. Well, so are we.
Who said they were enemies? Was that just the way it was? I mean,
it's the. I mean, I heard it from some dude.
Because they're foreign. They're foreign.
Yeah.
Well, the whole licensing thing is because you're doing something you're not allowed to do, and so you have to be licensed to do it. You have to get permission.
Exactly.
Wow.
So we see that the Federal Reserve Board has proposed this executive order to Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover declines on March the 3rd to issue this executive order. He's saying it is neither necessary or appropriate to do it. But then let's go to March the 6th, when President Roosevelt, 2 days after he was inaugurated. And on March the 6th, we see a proclamation entitled 2039. This proclamation says that whereas there has been a heavy and unwarranted withdrawal of gold and currency from our banking institutions for the purpose of hoarding. Here all
right, hang on, because something happened. Okay, so this document says Black Law's Dictionary defines the bank holiday of 1933, Exhibit 42A, in the following words. President Proclamation number 2039 issued March 6th. Or was that what he was just talking about? Was that 2039?
It was, but I'm not sure. Well, okay. We should pull that one up.
Okay. Let's see. Issued March 6, 1933, and number 2040 issued March 9th, 1933. Temporarily suspended banking transactions by member banks of the Federal Reserve System. Normal banking functions were resumed on March 13th, subject to certain restrictions. The first proclamation, it was held, had no authority in law until the passage on March 9th, 1933, of a ratifying Act 12 U.S.C.A. Section 95B, Anthony versus Bank of Wiggins, 182, Miss 88.3, 184, all these numbers. The present law forbids member banks of the Federal Reserve System to transact banking business except under regulations of the Secretary of the Treasury during an emergency proclaimed by the president. So they're setting it up.
Had to push it through. That's why they had to push it through without reading it, because otherwise the president would have been acting ultra virus, because he declared it and they had to ratify it on Thursday. He declared it on Monday and they had to ratify it. So he was doing something a little bit outside, the scope, it sounds like,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to read this because I think he jumped way down to the bottom. It says, take special note of the last sentence of this definition, especially the phrase present law. The fact that banks are under regulation of the Treasury today is evidence that the state of emergency still exists by virtue of the definition. Not that at this point we need any more evidence to prove we are still in a declared state of emergency or state of national emergency. From the Agricultural Adjustment Act of May 12, 1933, Exhibit 43, to issue licenses permitting processors, associations of producers, and others to engage in the handling in the current of interstate or foreign commerce of any agricultural commodity or product thereof. This is the seizure of the agricultural industry by means of licensing authority. So that's how they have all of the farmers. So I just saw a video today on TikTok about 2 guys being arrested with no bail, aren't able to even see an attorney for 3 weeks because they were performing animal husbandry on their farms, which I guess is taking care of your animals by means other than government vaccinations. Let's see. This is okay. In the first 100 days of the reign of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, similar seizures by licensing authority were successfully completed by the government over a plethora of other industries, among them transportation, communications, public utilities, securities, oil, labor, and all natural resources. The first 100 days of FDR saw the nationalization of the United States, its people, and its assets. What has Bill Clinton talked about during his campaign and early presidency? His first 100 days? Okay, so I think now we know that they took over all contracts, for we have already read in Exhibit 22, no contract is considered as valid as between enemies, at least so far as to give them a remedy in the courts of law of either government, or they have, in the language of civil law, no ability to sustain a persona standi in judicio. Because he was talking about the gold, isn't he?
All of a sudden we see because the people wanted the money out of their banks, they were declared to be hoarders. But we also see that in this executive order, in Exhibit 33, that whereas it is provided in Section 5B of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, at 48 Statute 411 as amended, that the President may investigate, regulate, prohibit, under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe, by means of license or otherwise, any transactions in foreign exchange in the export, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency, asterisk, 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 quotation mark, exactly as proposed by the Federal Reserve Board on March the 3rd of 1933. We see the exact same language. Yet, if we go back to March the 9th, 1933, and look at 48 Statute 1, Section 2, and what does it then say? Instead of excluding the transactions of the citizens of the United States, it says by any person within the United States or subject to the jurisdiction thereof. This was a misrepresentation of the facts on its face when they misrepresented this act and said that they put it exactly when in fact they put it exactly opposite of what it said. So now when we look at Exhibit 33A, we find that on March the 9th, President Roosevelt reissues this proclamation. The Congress had said that actually the President of the proclamation of March the 6th could not take effect until after they had approved it. They approved it on March the 9th, and as a result of that approval, on March the 9th, President Roosevelt reissued Proclamation 2039 as Proclamation 2040. And it says, whereas under the Act of March the 6th, 1933, all proclamations heretofore or hereafter issued by the President pursuant to the authority conferred by subsection B of the Act of subsection 5B of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, as amended, are approved and confirmed, that he can now issue this proclamation. That's the proclamation that we're operating under to this day. If we now go to the Hoover policy papers, written by the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture, we can read that those speculators and insiders were right was plain enough later on. The first contact of the money changers with the New Deal netted those who had removed their money from the country a profit of up to 60% when the dollar was debased. So now we see some of the problems. The American people were going into the banks and demanding their gold. But here we see in these papers that the insiders had already removed the gold out of the country. So consequently, when the people came for their gold, the banks didn't have it. They now needed protection. They needed military protection. And the people were actually declared to be the enemies. Therefore, the war powers were declared against we the people, and the military protection was offered to protect those banks. And we see from the same section 1 of Title 1 of 48 Statute 1 on March 9, 1933, that it goes ahead and says in Section N, whenever in the judgment of the Secretary of the Treasury such action is necessary to protect the currency system of the United States, and the Secretary of the Treasury in his discretion may require any or all individuals, partnerships, associations, and corporations to pay and deliver to the Treasury of the United States any or all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates owned by such individuals, partnerships, associations, and corporations. And we see that whoever shall not comply with the provisions of this act shall be fined not more than $10,000, or if a natural person may, in addition to such fine, be imprisoned for a year not exceeding 10 years. So now we see that not only could the people not get their gold, they were required to turn in any other gold they might have. And that anyone who violated the provisions of this act were now subject to criminal penalties. The takeover of the monetary system was complete. Now let's read from Roosevelt's papers, Exhibit 36. He says that during this banking holiday, it was at first believed that some form of script or emergency currency would be necessary for the conduct of ordinary business. Now realize, on March the 9th, all the money was seized by the Treasury of the United States. So the people were left penniless. They had no money. And Roosevelt recognized very well that we would have to have some form of emergency currency or script to continue the conduct of business. He says, we knew that it...
Okay, so it looks as if it's back. We're back on page 10. Wait. Oh, I see. Oh my God, because we need to go back to this. Dadgummit. I was like, wait a second. Why are we going back in time? Ugh. All right, guys. Sorry about that. That was my bad because I went back to check to see if he had said something, and then I forgot to jump forward. So I was like, where the heck are we? Okay, so we're back to page 11. To McFadden's comment.
Was when it was read from the clerk's desk. It is an important banking bill. It is a dictatorship over finance in the United States. It is complete control over the banking system of the United States. He goes on and says, it is difficult under the circumstances to discuss this bill. The first section of the bill, as I grasp it, is practically the war powers that were given back in 1917. And he goes on talking. And he says, I would like to ask the chairman of the committee if this is a plan to change the holding of the security back of the Federal Reserve note to the Treasury of the United States rather than the Federal Reserve agent. So you see what he's asking. Prior to 1933, the American people placed their gold on deposit with the Federal Reserve banks. The Federal Reserve banks held that gold as security. But when the American people wanted their money, they took their notes to the bank and got the gold, didn't they? But now we see McFadden asking the question, is this a plan to change the holding of the security from the Federal Reserve banks to the Treasury? Mr. Stigall answers. He says this provision is for the issuance of Federal Reserve bank notes, not for Federal Reserve notes. And the security back of it is the obligations, notes, drafts, bills of exchange outlined in the section to which the gentleman has referred. So the new currency is not secured by the gold. The gold was seized by the government. The new currency is going to be reserve banknotes. They're going to be secured by the obligations of the people held by the Treasury. So McFadden says then the new circulation is to be Federal Reserve banknotes and not Federal Reserve notes. Is that true? Mr. Stigall says, insofar as the provisions of this section are concerned, yes. We now have the emergency currency. Mr. Britton says, Exhibit 39, from my observation of the bill as it was read to the House, it would appear that the amount of banknotes that might be issued by the Federal Reserve System is not limited. It will depend entirely upon the amount of collateral that is presented from time to time for exchange for the banknotes. Is that not correct? Mr. McFadden says, yes, I think that's correct. Who is the collateral? The A's and the B's are all obligations upon the people of the United States. We became the collateral, the chattel collateral in this country. We became the chattel property. We look at Exhibit 40, Mr. Patman speaking. He says the money will be worth 100 cents on the dollar because it is backed by the credit of the nation. It will represent a mortgage on all the homes and other property of all the people in the nation. Who has the authority to mortgage property? Only the owner. Who is it that has now mortgaged the property? We are not owners, we are only users. The titles were seized on March 9th of 1933 under those war powers. We also find in 48 Statute 1 that when required to do so by the Secretary of the Treasury, each Federal Reserve agent shall act as agent of the Treasurer of the United States or the controller of the currency or both for the performances of any function which the Treasurer or the controller may be called upon to perform in carrying out the provisions of this paragraph. We see the Federal Reserve at that time was also taken over by the Treasury. We also remember that once the people and the institutions were declared to be enemy institutions, then the only way they could operate is under the form of license. If we go to Exhibit 4 or Exhibit 42, President Roosevelt's papers, we find that the Secretary of the Treasury will issue a license to banks which are members of the Federal Reserve System, whether national or state, located in each of the 12 Federal Reserve Bank cities to open Monday morning. So for any bank to reopen on Monday morning, they were now required to receive the license. If we go to Black's Law Dictionary, the current 5th edition that exists today, we can read the bank holiday of 1933. It sums it all up very well. It says Presidential Proclamations number 2039 issued March the 6th of 1933 and number 2040 issued March the 9th of 1933 temporarily suspended banking transactions by member banks of the Federal Reserve System. Normal banking functions resumed on March the 13th subject to certain restrictions. The first proclamation it was held had no authority in law until the passage on March 9th of 1933 of a ratifying act at 12 U.S.C. 95B. The present law forbids member banks of the Federal Reserve System to transact banking business, except under regulations of the Secretary of the Treasury during an emergency proclaimed by the President. 12 U.S.C. Section 95. We also find at Exhibit 43 that they also had authority to issue a license to other things. Under the Agricultural Adjustment Act, we find they were authorized to issue license permitting processors, associations of producers, and others to engage in the handling in the current interstate and foreign commerce of any agricultural commodity or product thereof, or any competing commodity.
Okay, something up here. It says, take special note of the last sentence of this definition, which he read previously for Proclamation 2039. So it says present law. Okay, take special note of the last sentence of this definition, especially the phrase present law. The fact that banks are under regulation of the Treasury today is evidence that the state of emergency still exists by virtue of the definition. Not that at this point we need any further evidence to prove we are still in a declared state of national emergency. So now they've got seizure of the agricultural industry.
Here we see the licensing of agriculture. As we go on, in the first 100 days, we can find the licensing and the takeover of industry after industry. We should also keep in mind that, as William Begley, we said that all contracts with the enemies became null and void. If that be the case, we should find some place in the statute where it says that those contracts we had with the Federal Reserve banks, in which they were required to return our gold, would have to be voided. If we go to HGR 192 of June the 5th of 19...
Okay, one more thing. It says... Now we know that they took over all contracts for, we have already read in Exhibit 22 that no contract is considered as valid as between enemies, at least so far as to give them a remedy in the courts of law of either government. And they have, in the language of civil law, no ability to sustain a persona standi in judico. So they have no personal rights at law. Therefore, we should expect that we should see in the statutes a time when the contract between the Federal Reserve and we the people, in which the Federal Reserve had to give us our gold on demand, was made null and void. And I believe that's what he's going to read.
33, we can read that every provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation which purports to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency, or an amount of money of the United States measured thereby, is declared to be against the public policy. And no such provision shall be contained in or made with respect to any obligation hereafter incurred. So here we see where the contract were abrogated on June 5th of 1933. Now let's go to Exhibit 45. We see the takeover of the money, the titles, and the property on March the 9th of 1933. But let's read from Roosevelt's papers. It says, this conference of 50 farm leaders met on March the 10th of 1933. They agreed on recommendations for a bill which were presented to me at the White House on March the 11th by a committee of the conference, who requested me to call upon the Congress for the same broad powers to meet the emergency in agriculture as I had requested for solving the banking crisis. What was that broad power that was used for the banking crisis? That was the war power. We now see Roosevelt saying he is being asked to use this same war power to control agriculture. He says, 3 days later, I sent the proposed bill, which had been drafted in accordance with the recommendations of the conference. That was the bill that Congressman Beck was talking of when he said, if this bill becomes a law, if it happily becomes a law, there will be no Constitution. That bill passed by a vote of more than 3-1. Exhibit 46, if we look, at the beginning of the Agricultural Adjustment Act. It says that the present acute economic emergency, being in part the consequence of a severe and increasing disparity between the prices of agriculture and other commodities, which disparity has largely destroyed the purchasing powers of farmers for industrial products, has broken down the ordered exchange of commodities, and has seriously impaired the agricultural assets supporting the national credit structure. It is hereby declared that these conditions in the basic industry of agriculture have affected transactions in agricultural commodities with a national public interest, have burdened and obstructed the normal currents of commerce in such commodities, and has rendered imperative the immediate enactment of Title I of this Act. So we see two or three key things. Number one, the emergency continued over agriculture. Number two, that the agricultural assets supported the national credit structure. All those millions of acres of farmlands, those securities which were necessary to create the emergency currency. And also we see that now agriculture had a national public interest. It was impressed into the public service under this extraordinary time of crisis. That is the war power. At 47 of this Agricultural Adjustment Act, Exhibit 47, we see it is hereby declared to be the policy of Congress. So we see it's not according to law, is it? It's now according to the policy, the public policy. If we go back to Exhibit 24, and we see, but in defining the meaning of the term enemy's property, we will be led into error if we refer to Fleta or Lord Coke for their definitions of the word enemy. It is a technical phrase peculiar to prize courts and depends upon principles of public policy as distinguished from the common law. So you see that once the emergency is declared, the law is abolished. And we now go under what is called the public policy, whereby we fall under the will, the total authoritarian will of the legislators. It is simply public policy. It is color of law in contradistinction from the law. Exhibit 48, 93.
Hold up. Okay, it says, once the emergency is declared, the common law is abolished, the Constitution is abolished, and we fall under the absolute will of government public policy. All the government needs to continue is to have public opinion on their side. If public opinion can be kept in sufficient degree on the side of the government, statutes, laws, and bills can continue to be passed. The Constitution has no meaning. The Constitution is suspended. It has been for 60 years. We're not under law. Law has been abolished. We're under a system of public policy, which is under the war powers. So when you go into a courtroom with your Constitution and the common law in your hand, what does that judge tell you? He tells you that you have no persona standi in judico. You have no personal standing at law. He tells you you're not to bother bringing the Constitution into his court because it's not a constitutional court, but an executive tribunal operating under a totally different jurisdiction.
$549. Under this procedure, we retain government by law. Special, temporary law perhaps, but law nonetheless. The public may know the extent and the limitations of the powers that can be asserted, and persons affected may be informed from the statute of their rights and their duties. Emergency war powers. 93-549, we find the discussion. And Mr. Katzenbaum, it says, my recollection is that almost every executive order ever issued straddles on several grounds, but it almost always includes the Trading with the Enemy Act, because the language of that act is so broad it would justify almost anything. Then Justice Clark says, most difficult from the standpoint of standing to sue. Speaking of what do the people do about it? He says the court, you might say, has enlarged the standing rule in favor of the litigant. But I don't think it has reached a point presently that would permit many such cases to be litigated to the merits. Then Senator Church says, what you are saying then is that if Congress doesn't act to standardize, restrict, or eliminate the emergency powers, that no one else is very likely to get a standing in court to contest. There is no persona standi in judicio. No personal standing to bring an action in court.
So I'm wondering if this goes along with the why we can't go in as men and women and say that they are violating, the Bill of Rights, because of the fact that we've got no more standing. So the man and the woman can't go into court and be heard because it's an administrative court, which is why we need the agency position.
It's all about public policy when they switch from law to public policy. And that's why the war on the narrative is so important now, where they try to influence people through the mainstream media to think a certain way. Because if the people go along with it, then the policy stands,
Yeah. But at this point, I don't even think they need public opinion. Honestly, they just need a few people on their side, because at this point they've used, they're manipulating the law, both military and local law, polices, sheriffs. They've manipulated them to follow public policy, and they can enforce whatever they want to enforce, whether the public wants it or not. I think it has to do with the person knowing who they are.
That's why they're called policemen instead of peacekeepers. Policy men.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think, and something that I think that these guys were missing, because this was a while ago that they did this, but there's when we accept liability for the name, we become US citizens. Therefore, we give them all the jurisdiction they need to hang us, which is why it's important to have that agency vessel to operate in their jurisdiction, because they've grabbed all of the commerce, the agricultural, the trade, and doing any kind of business. They've forced those companies into their jurisdiction through licensing. And so we ourselves now need to get a license to operate in commerce, to separate the liability and put it back on the ones who made a smash and grab for the gold in the first place. Anybody else have anything they want to say or ask? Is everybody getting it, what he's saying? Is anybody having issues, like not fully comprehending what's going on?
We are screwed. That's all. Oh my gosh, it is depressing. But I think what really blew me out of the water is they knew exactly what they were doing to begin with, but then they did it through the agricultural acts and all of that, and they knew to get control of that. But I think what really bothers me is that we are so uneducated on all this. I mean, look at the generations upon generations that we, with the schooling, and you know nothing of this. Like, this is just stuff you just don't know.
Well, you know, if you talk to Pastor, he would say that it's not that bad. It's just you have to know how to navigate in this policy world.
I agree with you, Judy, but if you don't even know it exists, is my point.
That's
a lot of people have no idea that this is even, that, this is all going on, because we're all entertained all day, every day, it's just sad.
Well, that's the brilliance of it. They set up something that no one would really work that hard to understand, because they bread and circus was going on, It's brilliant.
It really is. But I do have a question for you, Judy. I listened to the prior recording, and you had a paper, or it was at the end of the class where it showed where all this, certificate name change, certificate of name change, certificate of a whole bunch of stuff. Do you recall that? It looked like you took a screenshot of something, and I wanted to know where you possibly got that from.
Wow, I don't remember.
I'll tell you one second, because it's up there. You actually put it. It's called, hang on a second, it's right here, if you don't mind, because I'm trying to find
I posted it?
You did.
Oh, well,
and it's just a screenshot, though. And it might have been in the recording.
That's the thing that you talked to Deep End about after class.
Yes, and then I don't know the other young lady that's on the call. She usually has Bible study the same time as class, the first hour. She was on there. She was talking about her mom and dad were showing her the deed, and they said, okay, we're going to put it in the trust. And she's like, did you read this thing? You have the bank is the trustee or something. It was just pretty interesting. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, you know where it is, Judy? It's on April 25th. It says sample screen. I think it's from you.
Oh, with the green and the black?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where is there a website or something for this? I really want to see this thing.
Oh, that comes from the GTC in their criminal acts where they it's a manual. It's their manual, internal manual.
I'm sorry,
not internal because it's published. But
so, Joe, if you look right below that, she attached a PDF. That's where she got it from.
I don't. PTS function. Is that it?
Yeah.
It's in there. Okay. The 278 pages.
Yeah, it's just your manual, and somehow I found that, and I'm like, oh my God.
I mean, because you guys were talking about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like
that's what they pull up on their screen. It's like trading or something. You're trading in certificates.
So the screenshot is from that manual, or?
Yeah, it's in there.
Wow.
It's on the what I put for the link. I said the page number. You can see it on
69.
Okay. See, so
pull that PDF, pull down that PDF, and then just go to that page number, and you'll see. Oh, that's the.
Oh yeah, I see it now. Okay, yep. I was just like, oh my.
I know.
And when you're talking about it, I was like, man, that girl, she got some good stuff going.
Well, the Depository Trust Company and the Federal Reserve and all of them, they're all owned by the same people. They're all in the same bunch.
Oh, I believe the whole system is owned by that small. Well,
yeah. So
allegedly.
So they're connected, but people don't know about them, and they're located on 55 Water Street, which is
that's what I heard you saying too.
Yeah,
I was like,
it's all about the water.
The address.
It's all about the water.
Did you ever watch? What's the name of that big that movie that came out? It was about the crash. Oh, what's the name of it? It was real popular.
Big Short. The Big Short.
Oh yeah. Hang on one second, because they're calling me to help this guy out. Okay, so in that movie, at the end of the movie, thank you. they talk about who was the guy? He's talking about the water. And he was one of the guys that they didn't believe. I saw the movie years ago and I don't really remember too much of it, but he was like the main guy at the end. And at the end, if you look up the credits, they tell you what he did at the end when he actually got all this money, but he went into the water because he knew all the water rights that they were going to go after that.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, look at the credits, because that was one thing that really, Anyway, this is girls and guys.
Okay,
I
we're
just
doing
have
off
to turn my mute off.
the
Sorry.
reservation here with our discussion.
Sorry.
So back on track.
It's all important.
But yes, they. I just posted a video in the folder about how they worked very hard to keep us infants and to keep us uneducated and focused on other things.
That was the Rockefeller school system, or who was the school? Oh,
yeah,
right.
Rockefeller took hold of the school system.
Yeah, but there was other people in like that. The library, the guy Carnegie, all of them. They were.
Yeah.
Everybody thought they were good guys, and they weren't. So
they always come at us as philanthropists, doing something good. But really, they have an underhanded reason for doing it. Okay, let's continue on.
Hi, everybody.
I was seeing the takeover.
What?
I have a question. I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. Well, so you guys are just discussing, and it seems like you guys are lining up with my thoughts. I always wonder, we're told that the Secretary of Treasury is the principal, but do they have someone that they report to? I always wonder, who else is on top of that? And, some people I talk to, they're like, oh, well, we should be joining with the UN. And I'm like, yeah, but they're trying to take away the gun rights, I think. So why would I do that?
the Secretary of Treasury is the head of the IMF, too, International Monetary Fund. So it goes up.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. And I just okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, but I'm glad that I'm hearing confirmation on this end. So thank you.
Of the banks and the finance and the money. We've seen the takeover of agriculture. And from 93-549, we find that the interesting aspect of the legislation concerning the Agricultural Adjustment Act is the fact that it created a permanent agency designed to eradicate an emergency condition in the sphere of agriculture. So we see here now it's contemplated that this thing was not created simply as a temporary measure. There were implementations that this could be a permanent condition. If that be the case, and we know what now is the case, at Title 12 USC 95B, to this day, 1994, still under that emergency. That if that be the case, and we go to 93-549, we can understand what the congressmen were talking about. They said if the president can create crimes by fiat and without congressional approval, our system is not much different from that of the communist, which allegedly threatens our existence.
Okay, I just want to go over something before Exhibit 51. Okay, so Senate Report 549, Exhibit 50. The interesting aspect of the legislation lies in the fact that it created a permanent agency designed to eradicate an emergency condition in the sphere of agriculture. So these agencies, of which there are now thousands and which now control every aspect of our lives, were ostensibly created as temporary agencies meant to last only as long as the national emergency. They have become, in fact, permanent agencies, as has the state of national emergency itself. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said, we will never go back to the old order. That quote takes on a different meaning in light of what we have seen so far.
That we have a government that can do anything it wants to and has for over 60 years. On that same page, we see the language they use. The enormous scope of powers, a time bomb. This is the language our congressmen were talking about. Go to Title III of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and we know that our Constitution at the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by this Constitution, they don't have. If we don't specifically delegate the powers to the federal government, they're reserved to the states and the people respectively. We know that Article 1, Section 10 says Congress shall have the power to coin the money and regulate the value thereof. But if we go to Title III of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, we read, financing and exercising power conferred by Section 8 of Article 1 of the Constitution to coin money and regulate the value thereof. And we find this power being delegated from Congress to whenever the president finds upon investigation that the foreign commerce of the United States is adversely affected by reason of the depreciation of the value of the currency of any other government or governments in relation to the present standard of the value of gold, or that an expansion of credit is necessary to secure by international agreement the stabilization at proper levels of the currencies of various governments, the president is authorized in his discretion. At Exhibit 23, to direct the Secretary of the Treasury to cause to be issued in such amount or amounts as he may from time to time order United States notes as provided in an act entitled, an act to authorize the issue of United States notes and for the redemption of funding thereof and for the funding of the floating debt of the United States, approved February the 25th, 1862, and act supplementary thereto and amendatory thereof.
Something in between that says, remember that in the Constitution it states that Congress has the authority to coin all money and regulate the value thereof. How can it be then that the executive branch is issuing an emergency currency and quoting the Constitution as its authority to do so? This is something I should probably bring up with Pastor, because Pastor always says, well, Congress has the authority to coin all money and regulate. But if the executive branch is issuing the emergency currency, then that's a problem.
We see conferring the powers to the executive under the Civil War Act, the War Powers of February the 25th, 1862. And we must realize that Abraham Lincoln, when he was inaugurated president, didn't even have a Congress for over 6 weeks. He declared war. He issued money. He suspended the habeas corpus. He done all of those things as an absolute constitutional dictator. He done those without even having a Congress. But when Congress came back into session, realizing that there needed to be some approval, they said that the actions, rules, regulations issued by the president heretofore or hereafter are hereby approved and confirmed. The language of Section 5B as amended and the language of Title 12 USC 95B came from those acts of Congress of February the 25th, 1862, whereby the Congress did the same thing in approving the actions of Abraham Lincoln. So now
Can I
we
ask a question?
Yeah, what's up?
And I'm sorry. This is always something that always bothered me. I didn't understand it. So he's talking about Abraham Lincoln and the things he did. So obviously he was part of their system. Why did they shoot him? Why did they kill him then?
Well, my guess is because of the new 13th Amendment he tried to put into place, which was basically giving, if South Carolina joined the Union, that he would make sure that the states could not be controlled by the federal government, no matter what, even for slavery. And that would not work with their goals to create these state ofs, which is just byproducts of the federal
franchises. Sure. Oh, yeah. So he was actually going against what they wanted him to do.
Yeah.
Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. I was just curious because I never understood that he was doing their basic
dirty work for him.
Well, I guess that's one way of putting it. Right. You know, he did a lot of things he shouldn't have done. And then I said, but then why did they kill him? Because they were behind that also, you know, if you really look into it. Okay.
He served the purpose that they had for him, and they were disposing of him.
Because he didn't fulfill the rest of the purpose they had for him, I'm assuming. Am I reading that correctly? Am I understanding that?
Well, they're moving on. They have another plan. The plan, changes. It goes on.
No, I understand that, but he wasn't doing what they wanted him to do, is what I'm understanding from Dawn, right? Where he was deviating from the plan, so to speak.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jane.
Or he could have, maybe that was all that they wanted him to do. And so they might have had someone else doing the next plan. Because I'm sure they don't give everybody, one person, the entire plan.
When they're done with them, they get rid of them, like FDR. They got rid of him.
You know, I understand that, but I'm just saying, okay, he was doing his, but Dawn, you made me see a little bit different from what you're saying.
Lincoln was inaugurated January of 1861, and then he signed the new 13th Amendment into law, stating, "No amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give to Congress the power to abolish or interfere within any state with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of persons held to labor or service by the laws of said state." So this went completely, because they needed to to change the Constitution to get control over the people within these states. And that's when they basically, the Civil War broke out, and then Lincoln signed that amendment into law. It is said that Lincoln was beholden to the bankers, arrested people who disagreed with him, placed the army at the homes of judges when passing laws. But for this one specific, like, he had signed this into law. He had signed that new 13th Amendment into law. So he went against, I believe he went against their orders, because once they killed him, all of a sudden that second 13th Amendment, because remember, the first one was, if we find out that you've got a title or you have duties to another country, we will remove you from the United States. Where the Constitution just basically says you're not allowed to do that unless you get approval from Congress to be, to have a duty to another country. You're not allowed to take part in that. without the approval of Congress, but they never state that you can be thrown out of the United States. So their first, the bankers' first thing was to get rid of that 13th Amendment. And then once they did, they ended up, Abraham Lincoln ended up making a new 13th Amendment, which was passed, but it was right around the time the war broke out. And you got the international bankers funding both sides, both South Carolina and the federal government. And to alleviate going into war, he's like, look, we won't allow any more amendments to the Constitution that will take away states' powers. The bankers didn't like that, so they killed him. And then literally, I think it was, the powers that be took advantage of the tumultuous war and officially removed the original 13th Amendment in 1865, then destroyed the amendment Congress had ratified with Lincoln and proposed the new 13th Amendment, which basically allows you to become a voluntary slave or servant. And then right after that, they did the 14th Amendment, which created the United States citizen, a totally different citizenship than what the people within those states had, which were basically state citizens. Now they're United States citizens. So now there's two citizens dueling against each other. The state citizen and the federal citizen. So that's my guess as to why they offed him. Plus, once South Carolina, said, okay, I give up, then they didn't need Lincoln really anymore.
Find that the terminations of these actions are contained, like in the Agricultural Adjustment Act, Exhibit 54. It says this title shall cease to be in effect whenever the president finds and proclaims that the national economic emergency in relation to agriculture has been ended. And as we go through all these acts, we find that it terminates by presidential proclamation.
Hold on. Whole bunch of stuff just like pew. Okay, what is the Act of April 25th, 1862? It is the Greenback Act of President Abraham Lincoln. Let us remember that when Abraham Lincoln was elected and inaugurated, he didn't even have a Congress for the first 6 weeks. He did not, however, call an extra session of Congress. He issued money and declared war and suspended habeas corpus. It was an absolute constitutional dictatorship. There was not even a Congress in session for 6 weeks. So when Lincoln's Congress came into session 6 weeks later, they entered the following statement into the congressional record. Quote, the acts, rules, regulations, licenses heretofore or hereafter taken are hereby approved and confirmed, unquote. This is the exact language of March 9th, 1933 in Title 12 USC Section 95B today. We now come to the question of how to terminate these extraordinary powers granted under a declaration of national emergency. We have learned that in order for the extraordinary powers to be terminated, the national emergency itself must be canceled. Reading from the Agricultural Act, Section 13, Exhibit 54, which I believe is what he just read.
And the Congress talks about this in 93-549. They say, furthermore, it would be a largely futile task unless we have the president's active corroboration and support. Having delegated this authority to the president in ways that permit him to determine how long it shall continue simply through the device of keeping emergency declarations alive, We now find ourselves in a position where we cannot reclaim the power without the president's acquiescence. We are unable to terminate these declarations without the president's signature. We need a large measure of presidential cooperation, and that is one problem. Here we see that Congress is saying that without the president's acquiescence, that they don't think they have the power to terminate. The concern about that in Exhibit 56, we see Senator Church saying, these powers...
Hold on. Okay. It says, it appears that no president has been willing to give up this extraordinary power. And if they will not sign the termination proclamation, the access to and usage of extraordinary powers does not terminate. At least it has not terminated for over 60 plus years. Now that's no definite indication that a president from Bill Clinton on might not eventually sign the termination proclamation. Doubtful, because they own every single president. But 60 plus years of experience would lead one to doubt that day will ever come by itself. But the question now to ask is, how many times have we, the people, asked the president to terminate this or terminate his access to extraordinary powers or the situation on which it is based, the declared national emergency? Who has ever demanded that this be done? How many of us even know that it had been done? And without the knowledge contained in this report, how long do you think the blindness of the American public to this situation would have continued, and with it the abolishment of the Constitution? But we're not quite as in the dark as we were, are we?
Powers, if exercised, would confer upon the president total authority to do anything he pleases. We go to Exhibit 57, 93-549. Senator Church, like a loaded gun lying around the House, the plethora of delegated authority and institutions to meet almost every kind of conceivable crisis stand ready for use for purposes other than their original intention. He goes on and says, nor is it sufficient if this power be conferred upon good men, for men are frail and easily corrupted. And in a short time, he that is absolute may easily corrupt the people. Exhibit 58. As a consequence, a national emergency is now a practical necessity in order to carry out what has become the regular and normal methods of governmental action. What were intended by Congress as delegations of power to be used only in the most extreme situations and for the most limited durations have become everyday powers, and a state of emergency has become a permanent condition.
So now we're seeing why it is so vital for them to control who is president. They have to have control over that individual. Otherwise, their whole plan falls apart with one simple signing stating that we are out of an emergency. And I don't know, is that something that Congress would have to pass and the president sign, or can the president just sign it? I think the executive branch can determine that we are out of an emergency. So I believe, correct me if I'm mistaken, that we just need the president to declare we are no longer in a state of emergency and under the War Powers Act.
My understanding is the president has to sign that, every new president that comes in. So what if he just didn't sign it? Would it be in effect? Is there a time frame on this thing? You know what I mean? Because they say every president that comes in does sign it.
Renew the emergency to keep
renew.
And so there's a term called recontinuance post limine, which Boris was from Boris's mouth that I used, and that's things will return to normal after the war is over. well, this emergency is a state of war, essentially. And it's meaning that, we're under their control or that control until the truce is signed,
Yeah, which is why they constantly want wars to give them their excuse for why we cannot no longer be under, peace.
Department of Justice. So here we see that these conditions are well recognized. If we go to the Supreme Court, 1935, in United States versus Butler, the Supreme Court overturned.
Did he already read? No, he just read Exhibit 57. So, or did he read 58? Did he read 58? He's going to read 59. Yeah, he read 58. Okay.
United States versus Butler. The Supreme Court overturned these emergency powers. They said a tax in the general understanding and in the strict constitutional sense is an exaction for the support of government. This term does not connote the expropriation of money from one group to be expended for another, the necessary means in a plan of regulation, such as the plan for regulating agricultural production set up in the Agricultural Adjustment Act. They said the regulation of the farmers' activities under the statute.
Hold on. It says what is being said here is that a tax can only be an exaction for the support of government, not for an expropriation, not for an expropriation from one group for the use of another. That would be socialism. So now we've got, this is from United States versus Butler. That's what he's going to read, Exhibit 60.
Statute, the one formed subject to his own will, is in fact coercion. Through economic pressure, his right of choice is illusory. Even if the farmer's consent were purely voluntary, the act would stand no better. At best, it is a scheme for purchasing with federal funds submission to federal regulation of a subject reserved to the states. And in Exhibit 61, if the novel view of the general welfare clause now advanced in support of the tax were accepted, that clause would not only enable Congress to supplant the states in the regulation of agriculture and all other industries as well, but would furnish the means whereby all the other provisions of the Constitution, sedulously framed to define and limit the powers of the United States and preserve the powers of the states, could be broken down, the independence of the individual states obliterated, the United States converted into a central government, exercising uncontrolled police power throughout the Union, superseding all local controls over local concerns.
Isn't that what's happening now? Wouldn't you say? It says the United States Supreme Court ruled the New Deal, the nationalization, unconstitutional in the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and they turned it down flat. The Supreme Court declared it to be unconstitutional. They said, in effect, you're turning the federal government into an uncontrolled police state, exercising uncontrolled police power. What did Roosevelt do next? He stacked the Supreme Court, didn't he? And in 1937, United States versus Butler was overturned. What did I say earlier about they don't really need public opinion anymore because they have full control of police power and military power to make people agree.
In 1935, the Supreme Court struck down the emergency powers. If we remember our history, President Roosevelt immediately went to work to stack the court. Through death and resignation by 1937, the court was stacked. And these cases were again overturned. As a result of that, we've been under those emergency powers to this day, 1994. The court is now saying that the existence of war and the restoration of peace are to be determined by the political department of the government. And such determination is binding and conclusive upon the courts, and deprives the courts of the power of hearing proof and determining as a question of fact either that war exists or has ceased to exist. The courts says it's not their call to make. It's a political question. And once the condition has been determined by Congress, then the courts simply recognize that.
Okay, this says, the courts will tell you that is a political question, for they, the courts, do not have jurisdiction over the common law. The courts were deprived of the Constitution. They were deprived of the common law. They are now courts to prize over the enemies, and we have no persona standi in judico. We have no personal standing under the law. Also from the 75th Congress, under the section entitled Congressional Sources of Laws of War, we find, he's probably going to read Exhibit 63 soon.
At Exhibit 63, when the sovereign authority shall choose to bring it into operation, speaking of the emergency powers, the judicial department must give effect to its will. But until that will shall be expressed, no power of condemnation can exist in the courts. Again, the courts are saying it's a political question. Exhibit 64, 93-549. Just how effective a limitation on crisis action this makes the court is hard to say. In light of the recent war, the court today would seem to be a fairly harmless observer of the emergency activities of the President and Congress. It is highly unlikely that the separation of powers and the 10th Amendment will be called upon again to hamstring the efforts of the government to deal resolutely with a serious national emergency. If we go on with Exhibit 64, we can then begin to realize what has happened. It says, organizationally, in dealing with the Depression, it was Roosevelt's general policy to assign new emergency functions to newly created emergency agencies, rather than the already existing departments. So from that declaration of emergency, we've seen the ballooning of the federal bureaucracy, creation of multitudes upon multitudes of emergency agencies with emergency functions, to rule by statute in all cases whatsoever. The Constitution and the chains of that Constitution had been suspended. There was no limitations upon the power of government. It in fact became a central government of uncontrolled police power. But now we look at the definition of the prize. Exhibit 65. Goods taken on land from a public enemy are called booty. The distinction between a prize and a booty consists in this, that the former is taken at sea and the latter is taken on the land. So we see here there's a difference between the prize and the booty in the fact that the prize is captured on the water where the booty is captured on the land. But now we have to understand an important concept. If we go to our Constitution, we find that Congress shall have the power to provide and maintain a navy. This is a permanent power that exists and that Congress always had the power to provide the Navy to protect us from invasion. But we have to realize that the military power of the government under our Constitution did not come inland, because it said that Congress also has the power to raise and support the Army, but no appropriations for that purpose shall be greater than a period of 2 years. So we see that the permanent in the military force was the state militias. that the states, being sovereign, independent nation states, had their own armies inland. It was a militia. And the only time that the federal government could have a standing army was during a time of declared war. So consequently, the permanent prize jurisdiction could not extend inland. The federal jurisdiction could not extend inland in times of peace.
All right, let's just revisit that again. The significance of the distinction between the two terms is critical, a fact which will become quite clear shortly. Let us now remember that Congress shall have the power to make rules on all captures on the land and the water. To reiterate, captures on the land are booty and captures on the water are prize. Now the Constitution says that Congress shall have the power to provide and maintain a navy even during peacetime. It also says that Congress shall have the power to raise and support an army, but no appropriations of money for that purpose shall be for greater than 2 years. Here we can see that an army is not a permanent standing body because in times of peace, armies were held by the sovereign states as militia. So our armies and navy and everything, that was during peacetime, that was supposed to be for us here in the United States. Instead, they constantly put them outside in foreign countries to either get booty or prize. Armies were held to sovereign states militia. So the United States had a navy during peacetime, but no standing army. We had instead the individual state militias, which they got rid of. Consequently, the federal government had a standing prize court due to the fact that it had a standing navy, whether in times of peace or war. But in times of peace, there could be no federal police power over the continental United States because there was to be no army. So from the report, The Law of Civil Government in Territories Subject to Military Occupation by Military Forces of the United States, published by order of the Secretary of War in 1902 under the heading entitled The Confiscation of Private Property of Enemies in War, comes the following quote, which probably we'll read soon.
If we go to Exhibit 66, we find that should the President desire to utilize the services of the federal courts of the United States in promoting the purpose of military undertaking, since these courts derive their jurisdiction from Congress and do not constitute a part of the military establishment, we must secure from Congress the necessary action to confer such jurisdiction upon said courts. And it says the laws and usages of war make a distinction between enemy's property captured on the sea and property captured on land. The jurisdiction of the courts of the United States over property captured at sea is held not to attach to property captured on land in the absence of congressional action. So we see that there's no federal judicial power upon captures on the land without specific congressional action. If we now go back to the Act of October the 6th, 1917, in Section 17, we can see where that congressional authority was given over enemy's property inland.
Okay. So we see that our government can operate in two capacities. One, in its sovereign peacetime capacity, with the limitations placed upon it by the Constitution and restrictions placed upon it by we the people. Or two, in a wartime capacity where it may operate in its belligerent capacity, governed not by the Constitution, but only by the laws of war. Man, they're sneaky.
And it says that the district courts of the United States are hereby given jurisdiction to make and enter all such rules as to notice and otherwise, and all such orders and decrees, and to issue such process as be necessary and proper in the premises to enforce the provisions of this act. This is the inland booty congressional authorization to the district courts, the federal district courts, to make these decisions and to make all rules and all process. This occurred in 1917. In 1933, when the American people became the public enemies, then this authority had to be conferred over the people as well. If we go to the act of June the 19th of 1934, we see the act to give the Supreme Court of the United States authority to make and publish the rules and actions at law. This was called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedures Act, in conformity with Section 17 of the Act of 1917. This
Okay, so I'm just going to reiterate. It says here we have Congress conferring upon the district courts of the United States the booty jurisdiction, the jurisdiction over enemy property within the continental United States. And at the time of the original unamended Trading with the Enemies Act, we were indeed at war, a world war. And so booty jurisdiction over enemies' properties in the courts was appropriate. At that time, remember, we were not yet declared the enemy. We were excluded from the provisions of the original act. And in 1934, Congress passed an act merging equity and law, abolishing common law. This act, known as the Federal Rules of Civil Procedures Act, was not to come into effect until 6 months after the letter of transmittal from the Supreme Court to Congress. The Supreme Court refused transmittal, and the transmittal did not occur until Franklin D. Roosevelt stacked the Supreme Court in 1938. Okay, I'd say that that was not playing fair. I'd say that that was fraud. But on March the 9th of 1933, the American people were declared to be the public enemy under the amended version of the Trading with the Enemy Act. What jurisdiction were we, the people, then placed under? We were now the booty jurisdiction given to the district courts by Congress. It would no longer be necessary or of any value at all to bring the Constitution of the United States with us upon entering a courtroom, for that court was no longer a court of common law, but a tribunal under wartime booty jurisdiction. Take a look at the American flag in most American courts. The gold fringe around our flag designates admiralty jurisdiction.
act, and this power was then to be transmitted to Congress and would become effective after it had been transmitted to the Congress. But keep in mind that the Supreme Court turned down these actions in 1935, so the Supreme Court did not transmit to the Congress. This act was not transmitted to Congress until 1938, and the letter of transmittal came to the Senate and the House of Representatives at this time. So now we see that the jurisdiction was complete. In 1938, the booty jurisdiction, federal court's authority over the lands under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, was finally transmitted and approved. We can then see some evidence of what this has done in later years. August the 1st, 1972, Executive Order 11677. By virtue of the authority vested in the President by the Constitution and statutes of the United States, including Section 5B of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, as amended at 12 U.S.C. 95A, we see that at that time, in 1972, the President took authority and placed the price freezes and the grain embargoes over agriculture. It's through these actions that literally hundreds of thousands of farmers were eliminated from the land. This is just only one of the most recent examples. And it says the reason to do this is to protect the domestic economy from the excessive drain of scarce materials and reduce the serious inflationary impact of abnormal foreign demand, so it is hereby ordered. You see the tremendous scope of powers that this gives.
Okay, back to the document. Section 5B certainly seems to be a one-sided support for presidential authority, doesn't it? Surely the reason for this can be found by referring back to Exhibit 49, the words of Mr. Katzenbach in Senate Report 93-549. My recollection is that almost every executive order ever issued straddles on several grounds, but it almost always includes the Trading with the Enemies Act because the language of that act is so broad, it would justify almost anything. The question here, and it should be a question of grave concern to every American, is what type of acts can almost anything cover? What has been and is being done by our government under the cloak of authority conferred by Section 5B. But now I think we are beginning to know, has the termination of the national emergency ever been considered? In Public Law 94412, September 14th, 1968, Exhibit 70, we find that Congress had finally finished their exhaustive study on the national emergencies, and the words of their findings were that they would terminate the existing national emergencies. We should be able to heave a sigh of relief at this decision, for with the termination of the national emergencies will come the corresponding termination of extraordinary presidential power, won't it? But yet we have learned two different lessons. We are still in the national emergency, and that power, once grasped, is difficult to let go. And so now it should come as no surprise when we read the last section of the Act, Section 502, Exhibit 71. Kind of goes back to absolute power corrupts absolutely.
On September the 14th, 1976, Congress consequently passed Public Law 94-412. This was an act to terminate certain authorities with respect to national emergencies, and they terminated the existing declared national emergencies. However, if we go to Section 502, the last section of that act, we find the act reads, the provision of this act shall not apply to the following provisions of law, the powers and authorities conferred thereby, and actions taken thereunder. 1. Section 5B of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, as amended, 12 U.S.C. 95A. So we see.
Okay, so it's getting close to 8 o'clock. Do you guys want to just finish this out? It looks like we have about, less than 10 minutes?
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, the alarming situation in which we the people find ourselves today causes us to think back to a time over 200 years ago in our nation's history when our forefathers were also laboring under the burden of government usurpation of individual rights. Their response, written in 1774, 2 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, to the attempts of Great Britain to retain extraordinary powers it had held during a time of war, became known as the Declaration of Rights.
See that on October the 6th, with the termination of the national emergencies, the emergency conferred on March 9, 1933, under the authority of Section 5B of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, was exempted from that termination. As a result, we continue under that emergency to this day. We now go back to the first document that our forefathers wrote to the Parliament and King of Great Britain. On October the 14th of 1774, 2 years prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we can read, Whereas, since the close of the last war, and we see here again that our forefathers weren't arguing during the war, but they're saying that once the war ended, the war powers did not terminate. And they go ahead and say that the British Parliament, claiming a power of right to bind the people of America by statute in all cases whatsoever, hath in some cases excessively imposed taxes on them, and in others under various pretenses, but in fact for the purpose of raising a revenue, hath imposed rates and duties payable in these colonies, established a board of commissioners with unconstitutional powers, and extended the jurisdiction of the courts of admiralty, not only for the collecting of the said duties, but for the trial of causes merely arising within the body of the county.
Okay, so we can now see that we have come full circle to the situation which existed in 1774, but with one crucial difference. In 1774, Americans were protesting against a colonial war, which sought to bind and control its colony by wartime powers in a time of peace. In 1984, it's our own government which has sought successfully to date to bind its own people by the same subtle, insidious method.
We came full circle, haven't we? We've ended up today, 1994, right back where we started. On October the 14th of 1774, the same conditions are in place. We're under the same bondage under the old colonial powers, right back where we started. But we have one thing. In our Constitution, we wrote laws for government. And at Article 3, Section 3 of our Constitution, we said, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against him, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. And no person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Act of March the 9th, 1933 is amended, treason, this will be for the common law courts to decide. And whether governmental acts of theft of the nation's money, citizens' property, and Americans' liberty as an ideal and a reality, which have occurred since 1933 as treason against the people of the United States as the term is defined in the Constitution of the United States, probably cannot be determined until the Constitution is reestablished. Therefore, we must restore that Constitution. However, for our part, we firmly believe that by their fruits ye shall know them. And on that authority, we rest our case. I'll now turn this program back over to Mr. Alvin Jenkins. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schroeder. I'm sure that you have heard and maybe might even be guilty of hearing a statement. I know there's something wrong, but what can I do about it? I have voted in every election since I was eligible and attained the right age. I will agree with all of that. I know something else too, that when you go into a court of law, they say ignorance is no excuse. We have not presented you with anything but your own government's documents. Not my saying it, not Dr. Schroeder saying it, but what your government officials said. You said, well, Alvin, I'm a Democrat. We'll blame it on the Republicans. I can say I'm a Republican. We'll blame it on the Democrats. History will show you since President Roosevelt issued Executive Order Proclamation 2039, the following people has been in office. There have been 5 Democrat presidents, 5 Republican presidents. I'll submit to you, neither one of them had the guts to reinstate the United States Constitution. Let me refresh your memory who they were. You had Truman, Democrat. Kennedy, Democrat. Johnson, Democrat. Carter, Democrat. Clinton, Democrat. Eisenhower, Republican. Nixon, Republican. Ford, Republican. Reagan, Republican. 10 presidents all left you as chattel property. When you read your Bill of Rights, it instructs you what to do. Can we stay under this? You like for your children to be chattel property, and that home that you're making 30-year payments on belongs to the government and you only have possession, then complain, but don't do nothing. But if you would like to change it, turn to an American. First, Republicans and Democrats, second and third. In God, we trust. That's our motto. Thank you. And the next speaker will be my friend, Jerry Russell.
Okay, so we're going to read the rest of the paper. Okay, conclusion. As you have just witnessed, the United States of America continues to exist in a governmentally ordained state of national emergency. Under such a state of emergency, our Constitution has been set aside, ostensibly for the public good, until the emergency is canceled. But as experience painfully shows, it has not been to the public's good that our government has used its unrestricted power, unhampered by the Constitution's restraining force. The governmental edicts and actions over the past 6 decades have led us to the desperate state in which we find ourselves today, besieged on every side, corroding from within, frightened and in despair. We, as a nation, are being torn asunder. There is a national emergency today, one of life and death proportions. But it is not the emergency used by our government to continue its abuse of power. It is this very abuse, this unbridled rape of the American spirit, that is the crux of the emergency we're in today. But this true emergency cannot be cured by setting aside the Constitution. No, it can only be controlled by returning the laws of God and country which have been stolen from us by those in whom we placed our trust to protect the national interest. We are a nation whose government is based upon those immortal words, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. One has only to walk down the highways and byways of this great land to know all too well that this is not a government of the people or for the people. Actions speak louder than words, and the actions taken over the past decades have resulted in an unparalleled decline of American economic and political power and a weakening of American values and spirit. This is not a crisis in which the taking up of arms is the answer. No, this is a situation in which we firmly believe that the pen will be mightier than the sword, that a state of emergency exists cannot be disputed, that the emergency is one of which should concern every American alive cannot be denied, that we must stand together, laying aside our individual differences to fight the common foe, is of vital importance, for the time to act is now. But this is not a battle of swords, but of knowledge, for only when the deception is exposed to the light of day can the healing process begin. Truth stands tall in the light of day, and it is the truth we bring to you today. Let it be known and understood that it is our intention to make this information available to every concerned American who desires to know the true state of the Union. This is an undertaking of immense proportions, but we have dedicated ourselves to bringing this information to the light of day, and with the help of we the people, we will be successful in our efforts. Every American who is thankful for the opportunity to call themselves American must also accept the responsibility that comes with that title. We the people have not only a right, but a responsibility to each other and to those who have gone before us to learn what our government is doing, and to judge whether actions taken benefit the people who will bear the costs. And we have been in the dark long enough, content to rest on our past glories and let the government take its course. In a way, we have been like children, trusting our parents to act in our best interest. But as we have too frequently seen in the nightly news, not all parents have their children's best interests at heart. The time has come for us to take off our blinders and accept reality. For the time of national reckoning has arrived. The majority of our elected and appointed officials are no more responsible for the current state of affairs than we are. The strings are being manipulated at far higher levels than the positions most officials occupy. They are working with little knowledge or authority, trying to control the problems far bigger than even they realize. Their programs and actions may seek to cure the symptoms, but the time has come now to attack the disease. They are no more guilty than we are, nor will they be any more protected when the nation collapses in on us. If we blame them for this national emergency, we must also truly blame ourselves, for it is we the people to whom this nation was given, and whose duty it was to keep a watchful eye on those who direct the sails of the ship of state. We have, however, fallen asleep, and while we were dreaming the American dream, a band of pirates stole the Constitution and put our people into slavery. And such that terrible day when our Constitution was cast aside, not one president or Congress, nor one Supreme Court justice has been able or willing to return it to its rightful owners. Given the current state of the Union, there is no reason to expect the situation to change unless we ourselves cause it to be. Let us put the childish emotions of pity and self-deception away, stand up and stand together and fight back. Now is the time to stop dreaming and start the long work before us. Now is the time to turn back to the principles and ideals on which this nation was founded, the strong foundation from which our national identity springs. When does tolerance become anarchy? When does the protection become slavery? When is enough enough? Now is when, here and now. Now is the time to return to the laws set forth by God and throw off these chains of ignorance and bondage which gripped our nation to the point of death. Let us return to the source, the standard excellence set for us all along. Our message to Congress and all elected and appointed officials must be, let my people go, for we are all laboring under a system which will eventually crush us, regardless of our religion, our sex, or the color of our skin. We must let those at all levels of governmental authority know that we have learned of the deception which lies at the core of our national malaise. We must tell them in no uncertain terms that we will tolerate this great lie no longer, and we must put them on notice that we expect them to resign if they have not the courage and the resolve to help this nation in its hour of need. We have been fools long enough, no matter how long after the date you read this report. Start each and every week without fail to give a copy of this information to at least one person you know. We also ask that you write a letter to Congress telling them to let our people go, or you can use the form letter you will find enclosed in the report. We must let our elected officials know that we expect them as servants of the people to help us reestablish law and order and restore our national pride. They must repeal Proclamation 2039-2040 and Title 12 U.S.C. 95A and 95B, thereby canceling the national emergency and reestablish the Constitution to this nation. Now is the time for excellence of action. We demand it and will accept nothing less. This is our country, to protect and defend no matter the cost. To do nothing out of fear or apathy is exactly what those in power are hoping for it is ignorance and apathy that the darkness likes best. We must not be a party to the darkness enveloping our nation any longer. We must come into the light and give our every drop of blood, sweat, and tears to bring our nation back with us. We must acknowledge that if we do nothing, we are not willing to act now and act boldly, without fear, but with faith and a firm resolve. Our freedom to act at all may soon be taken away altogether. New bills, new laws are being presented daily, which will effectively serve to tighten the chains of bondage already encircling this nation. My friends, we are not going into slavery. We are already there. Make no mistake, those in power are already tightening the chains, but they are doing so slowly, quietly, and with great caution, for fear of awakening the slumbering lion. which is the voice of the American people. There is yet still time for us to slip loose the chains which bind us, for us to bring about the restoration of this nation. If we make our concerns known and shout out our refusal to accept the future which has been planned for us by those who hold no allegiance to this great land of ours, we can yet demand and see come to pass the day when the state of emergency is canceled and the Constitution is restored to her rightful place as the watchdog of those for whom absolute power corrupts absolutely. We repent of our ignorance and our apathy and return to the God-given laws on which this nation was founded. We may yet be free. We will continue to hold meetings and offer this information until everyone in America has had an opportunity to hear it, and we have set our nation free. We will not tolerate less. We are Americans, and that means far more than most of us realize. If at first it seems you are working alone, do not give up, for as this information spreads across the land to the great cities and small towns, you will find yourself in excellent company. You already are, as only one, for behind you stand all the heroes of our history who fought and died to keep this nation free. Again, we must stress that we are not asking you to pick up guns. In fact, we implore you not to, no matter how angry the news of this deception has made you. Turn your anger into a steely resolve, a fierce determination not to give up until the battle has been won. We are not asking you for lots of money. That's their game, the almighty dollar. It is the substitution of wealth and possessions for integrity and honor that helped get us into this true state of emergency in which we find ourselves now. We are not asking you for more time than you can give, although we do ask you give what time you can to get this information out. What we ask from you is your commitment to stand with those around you to help us restore this nation to her rightful place in history, both that written and that yet to be told. Abraham Lincoln once said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution." We must stand together now in this, our national hour of need. As the United States Supreme Court once said, it is not the function of our government to keep the citizens from falling into error. It is the function of the citizens to keep the government from falling into error. Each individual, their attitudes and actions forges their own special link to the great chain of history. Now is the time to add to that precious inheritance of honor and duty, which has kept America alive, because the choices we make and the actions we take today are a part of history as well as our future. The vision of America has not died. The land of the free and the home of the brave still exists. There is still time to turn the tide for this great land, but we must join together to make that happen. We have a debt of honor to the past and the future, a call to glory to rescue out homeland from the hands of those who would see her fall. We must not fail. And there's the example letter. Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah, that's my neighbors, by the way, if you can hear that slamming around. So anyways, those are the letters. And that's it.
So one comment, he talks about, or it's talked about, he talks about it as the people became the enemy. And so the confusion is, are people and persons equivalent? Because my understanding was the persons became the enemy of the state.
Yeah, it's only the U.S. citizen that is the enemy of the state.
Yes, but those are the persons.
Yes.
So he's talking about it. He uses the term people. So maybe it's just a detail, a minor detail.
This was back in the 90s, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure they didn't know as much as we know today. But, we build upon the information that the people before us have brought into light.
Well, one thing I find interesting is Pastor seems to diminish that there's any chattel, ever chattel or anything. What's said in here, he would say he doesn't agree with it. I think most of it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, if
I mean,
may. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Kay.
Oh, I was just gonna comment on Pastor's insights on this one. Probably because he interprets scripture differently. Like he sees the government as like something neutral, not wicked, not evil. And I think it's a misinterpretation of Romans 13, if I'm not mistaken. So
when
he says that the government is not the enemy, it's like the government is God's tool to punish the wicked, something like that. Because I remember hearing him saying that over and over again. But it's a misinterpretation of Romans. I think it's 13. I'll check that.
13.
Mm-hmm. And I think Harold has a different interpretation. I go with what Harold says. Harold, I agree with what he said. It's not talking about the government, like present day government. It was talking about the religious leaders of the time during, Jesus' time. That's a context.
So what Pastor says is that it is God, government, man, where private nobody says it's God, man, government.
Right.
Abby, chill.
And even the Bible says it's there's no it's God, and then Jesus is the head of the body, and then we are the body. So that's the hierarchy. Like no government is above man. There's no, even with the authority like given in Genesis 1, I think, or 2, probably 1. My memory is really bad. Where he gave dominion to man. The dominion was only over all creation except another man. So there's no dominion for man to be over another man, if that makes sense. Yeah. I can't hear Judy.
Yeah, I had somebody come over, so I don't know what you just said. Or if somebody answered you.
I think I see Judy, like she's trying to talk, but there's no sound coming out.
I don't know, Judy.
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my computer has trouble. I don't know what to say. I think Pastor would not agree with this interpretation of this stuff,
Yes and no. And again, I don't necessarily agree with Pastor 100% on his take of the government, because even though, God does ordain government, he puts people in place, or should I say, he allows certain people to be in government, to oversee the people. Like nobody is in government that he hasn't ordained. And government is for the wicked. It's not for those who are obeying the law. his take is there's just a few rotten apples in government. That's not my take. The whole kit and caboodle is just government itself. The corporation, like the overall setup of government isn't bad. What makes it bad is the men in positions of power where when they get a taste of it, they don't want to let it go. And that's told to us in 1 Samuel chapter 8 about what will happen because the Israelites didn't want God ruling over them. They wanted a government like the Babylonians. And so he warned them about exactly what would happen if they chose that. And he said, okay, that's fine. I'll give you what you want, but this is what's going to happen. And you're not going to be happy about it. And so that's when he instituted government for his people. But there was already government going on before that. There was the government of the Babylonian government. And they're like, talk about Nebuchadnezzar. God was overseeing, like he basically told him, I'm allowing you to have all of this and I can take it away from you in a split second. And he proved that he could take it away from Nebuchadnezzar in that split second. Do I agree with Private Nobody that it's just church officials? No. I believe that during that time that Paul wrote it was during Nero's reign when he was, putting the Christians in for sport into the Colosseums to be eaten by lions, lighting them on fire as like human torches while they sat around having, dinners and stuff like that. And the Christians wanted to revolt. They were scared. They were angry. And Paul was telling them in Romans 12, God will avenge you. Do not pick up the sword. And in 13, he was saying, look, God gives government authority to watch over those who are doing wrong. The sad consequence is that men's hearts are evil. They just are innately evil. And when they get a taste of power, they don't want to let it go. And if it's an evil person in government, then they're gonna instill laws that are evil. Does it mean that you obey them? Absolutely no. But you don't take up arms and fight them either. Christians don't. Heathens might. That's the way that they might settle an issue. But Christians are not to do that. Christians have another way to warfare against an evil government, and that is on their knees. So, did somebody want to?
Yes, I was just going to say that I like the conclusion of the Wars Powers Act that you read earlier, where and I agree with what you said about being on your knees is a more powerful position to be in rather than taking up arms. And so that reminded me of 2 Chronicles 7:14, which I posted. It talks about how God promises that if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. So that's a powerful promise, but we have to turn back to repent, ask for forgiveness, and go back to his ways, because those are the laws, the good laws that he wants people to obey, to implement, to do. It's theonomy rather than theocracy that he was trying to implement through Israel first and then to the other nations. Theonomy just means God's laws, like only God's laws, but no, they wanted a king, and that is a man-made system which God did not like, and he warned them about it, like what the kings will do to you, to your children, to your property. This is what's going to happen. And yet they insisted on it. So they didn't want just God's laws. They wanted the Babylonian or man-made system.
Yep. Because they could get away with a lot more that way. Honestly.
But even then, like when he allowed the king, he said the king will have to write the Torah. He will have to write all this and tie it around his neck day and night, so he will know it by heart and implement it. He's not supposed to come up with laws and commandments of his own, but just implement Yah's laws because they're good.
Yeah, which is what the Pharisees and Sadducees started to do with their own laws in making it so impossible for people to like have a relationship with God, because they had to like do all these innate, insane, like you can't have, you know, a matzo ball that's bigger than this dimension, or you can't have like, you know, it's so ridiculous. And it was their way of gaining control over God, and like for man to seek their wisdom instead of from man to seek God's wisdom. And the same with the Catholic Church. It's always like, no, you can't go to God directly. You have to go through me, and then I'll go to God. And it's this hierarchy, this power trip that always gets man into trouble. And our government has gone full out demonic in every single way. They do not, we've gotten to the time where good is evil and evil is good. And so, you know, all we can do is pray to the Most High and say, look, you need to help out here, because, you know, our nation's going down. It's got a bunch of demons in it. And so, you know, I'm trying to do what's right. I'm trying to live within what you see as good and evil, within your laws, and, you know, help us figure it out whenever we have an interaction with the government. This is why we have to be sojourners when we have interaction with them, because they have no jurisdiction with sojourners. They only have jurisdiction with those who state that they are within their jurisdiction. And by saying you're a U.S. citizen, by saying you're a person, by saying you're the name, you are putting yourself within their jurisdiction. So we need to start learning those lines, those jurisdictional lines, and being able to articulate the position and defend the position that you are not in their jurisdiction, because you're not doing anything evil for them to have to, you know, watch over you. Because again, government is for the wicked. If you're not being wicked, then the government should have nothing to do with you. So it's just about setting. Go ahead.
I have a couple things. After going through this, I would recommend a book. A follow-up book is called On Our Way, which was the first year of the FDR administration. It was ghostwritten, of course, but the author is listed as FDR. But it's about, you know, from the very beginning, where the governors were in the Oval Office, in the West Wing to help out. And it goes through, I mean, it's a story with a lot of executive orders and stuff in it. So, and I scanned the whole book, so I can provide a copy of it. But what's that?
It's on the Internet Archive.
No. You're kidding. I wonder if they took my copy. Because it wasn't available. No, nobody had it. Google didn't. Okay, interesting. Because it wasn't available. There was
Digital Library of India? What? So
well,
weird.
they could have, people share stuff, and I don't know. I mean, it wasn't available anywhere. So it's called On Our Way. Are you looking at the right book?
Yeah. It's contents, chapter 1 is the swearing of the new cabinet, the closing of the banks, the governor's conference, the Emergency Bank Act.
Send me that. I want to see that. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the contents. Okay. Well, if somebody else had it, I sure went to a lot of trouble to bust a book apart and scan it. And then the other thing is what I posted on there. If you want to, it's 2 pages from the congressional record, and it lists the sub-treasuries. It's from 1916 when they were transitioning the Fed and the Treasury. And it's this McAdoo report by this his name's McAdoo. He was the first Federal Reserve chair, and he also was the Secretary of the Treasury at the same time. He was serving in both capacities in the beginning. And I learned about him because his name was on the post office cornerstone where I live here. And I was like, who's that guy? And I went and looked him up, and I go, oh my gosh, because it was built in 1913, the building. So anyway, it shows these list of sub-treasury, the cities where these sub-treasuries were, which some have been converted to Federal Reserve banks, but they were selective about that. They didn't. They used their favoritism for where they put these banks,
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, someone did a job photocopying it.
Okay, where? Give me the link. Or where did you
put it in there?
What's
in there? It's in there. It's in the folder.
See, archive. Okay, wait a minute. I want to see if it's my book.
It's like I can see people's fingers in the photocopy.
Oh, no. No, that's not mine. Somebody else did it. I wonder when this was done. Is the show when it was
I think it was
uploaded?
2015, looks like.
When?
2015.
Well, it sure wasn't out there when I did. I must have done mine before that then. I bet you I did.
Either that or it was 2017. It's either 2017 or 2015.
Yeah, I see that. That's very interesting. Somebody else found it worth copying.
Yeah.
I had to rip the binding off so it would lay flat on the scanner.
Right. Oh, wait, this one seems a little bit better. Oh, wait, what?
I can post my copy, my PDF. Maybe you found mine somewhere.
Yeah, this other one it's not good. Yeah, nobody else seems to have it except for that crappy copy. So if you want to post it somewhere, see if it's a little better than that copy that they did. I mean, it's readable. It's just, fingers are in the way. All right, peeps. Well, 8:30. So I'm going to let you go.
Thanks a lot, Dawn.
I have a question, if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
Do any of you guys remember what, oh my gosh, it just went out the window.
I hate that when that happens.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Judy, he was talking to you last week, when we did the book club where I wasn't on it. What was his name?
Are you still recording?
Oh my, yeah. Hold on.